Are you creating trust with your audience through vulnerability, or is your vulnerability working against you? In this episode, you're going to learn the importance of empowered storytelling, how to create real connection online, which we all want, and 3 major tips to help you build real trust with your audience. But you're going to have to stick around to the end for those tips. Today's guest, Erika Ashley, is an award-winning entrepreneur, writer, feminist, and TEDx speaker who leverages over a decade of press, branding, and social media marketing experience in her work as a publicist and strategist for entrepreneurs, digital influencers, and small businesses. Her clients have included Grammy-winning brands, celebrities, and entrepreneurs. Now, before we go any further, I want to give a shout out to our generous sponsors, the Mayfair Hotel and Eve American Bistro in downtown LA, which is home of my 3-day event, Amplified Soul Live, that takes place February 22nd to the 24th, 2019. This event will help you amplify your presence, influence, and impact. You'll walk away from this 3-day experience with tools to create influence and impact and strategies to boldly stand out and be recognized for the work that you do. In addition to that, you're going to gain a new community of like minds to support you along the way, and that is my personal guarantee. For event tickets and info, head to www.rubyfremon.com/ASL. And finally, whether you're new to this podcast or a loyal love puncher, please make sure that you take a moment to drop a rating and review on iTunes, because apparently this shit helps. Now on to the episode with the incredible Erika Ashley. Welcome to Love Punch, where I'm challenging leaders, entrepreneurs, and creatives to make a lasting impact. I'm your host, Ruby Fremont, and I'm here as a catalyst for you, the new generation of thought leaders. Join me each week as I dive into raw conversations with real impact makers. Erika Ashley, I am so fucking excited to have you on here for one major reason, and that's because you're one of the few people that I see in the online entrepreneurial space that is honest as fuck. Like, you don't hold back, but you do so in a way that I feel draws people into your orbit. I know we had talked about the term vulnerability vomit, and I really want to dive into that. First of all, it's a great term, and I think everyone listening could think of at least one person's post that they've seen online where it's definitely the definition of vulnerability vomit.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. I mean, vulnerability vomit is a huge problem. I think it's one of the biggest problems that we're seeing right now, where people don't know the filter of what's appropriate to share and what's not appropriate to share. I think we've gotten lost somewhere in the authenticity conversation, where we feel like we have to talk about our mess while we're in our mess and do it in the least graceful way possible. And it doesn't really help anyone or build your authority or build your brand in a meaningful way. If anything, it does the complete opposite, because it doesn't allow for connection. It is really just you venting your feelings, and nobody really wants to hear that.
Yeah. So venting feelings versus creating connection. And I mean, really, the reason why so many people are on this like authenticity train, this trend, is that authenticity creates connection. And yet I agree. It's created this amplified, immense focus on like, well, I'm just going to share everything.
Yeah, and there's no obligation to share everything either. Like, I actually don't think that that's a good thing. Every single business, I mean, when you think about celebrities even, they share things, but then there's things that are just for themselves. And the same thing is kind of needs to be true for entrepreneurs. You can absolutely share things with your audience, and you can be as much of an open book as you want. But if you're still processing something, you don't really have the space and you don't have the distance that you need from what you're going through to suck out the really juicy parts that will help people connect, which is like the lessons, the struggles, and how you got to the other side. When you're just in it, you're not in a place where you can be emotionally reflective. You're just emotionally reactive. And so that's where you'll be posting from or live streaming from. And that's not helpful. It's just vomit. It's literally word vomit.
Yeah. And Love Punchers, let me remind you that Erika Ashley is an award-winning entrepreneur. She's been recognized for her work as a publicist and a strategist for entrepreneurs. So what she's saying means something, and take note. And I think, even for me, like I've had a lot of clients come to me and say, "Hey, Ruby, I want to be more authentic in what I'm doing. I want to talk about this, but I'm really scared and I don't know how, and I feel like it might be too much." What do you say to that? Because for me, I always feel like if it feels like it's too much, you're probably still in it.
Yeah, if it feels like it's too much, you're probably still in it, or you need to figure out like what that fear is about. If it's something that has, been a part of your past, maybe you haven't fully cleared it and maybe you haven't fully gone back to it. And so opening up the can of worms might be a good thing for you so that you can heal and see where you're still, hanging on to something that isn't beneficial for you. And then if you're just scared because you don't know if it'll be polarizing and if it'll create backlash, but truly emotionally you're not attached to it, that's probably just your, internal yellow light, your fear popping up because it's what you need to grow. So it's about knowing that difference of, is this emotionally uncomfortable because I'm uncomfortable, or am I emotionally fine and I'm just afraid of how this is going to stretch my brand or how it's going to grow, or if it's going to turn some of the people who have been fans away from being fans, because it's not a universal truth. It's not safe. It's not fluffy.
Right. Yeah, because it's important for our fans, our audience, to connect to us with our stories, right? Like that's one of the reasons why our audience connects to us. That's one of the reasons why people are drawn to our orbit, because they feel in some way, shape, or form connected to a aspect of our story or multiple aspects of our story. So story is important, but
Yeah.
there's a fine line between too much.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's about knowing what parts of your story are going to resonate with your audience and what parts won't resonate
Mhm.
with them. And it's about knowing that fine line. You have to have, I think, as an entrepreneur, things that belong to you and you alone as well, and that you don't share on social media. So maybe that's, you don't post photos of your kids. Maybe it's, you don't post photos of certain family members. Maybe it's, you don't talk about, a specific thing that you're going through or a specific move that you're going through, because it's nobody's business and it's not something that you maybe want to share. Maybe you do want to keep it private, but you have to kind of decide those things and you have to really set those boundaries. And I think the earlier that you set them in your business, the better, because if you set up an expectation of anything's on the table for your audience, they're going to expect and they're going to feel like they have the right to comment on more and more and more,
Mm.
which I think can make it so difficult for you to figure out what is your truth versus where you're actually starting to play into this ongoing fear of just living for your audience versus living for yourself.
Right. And so you, as the influencer, could then become influenced by your audience, which totally throws you off track.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's obviously feedback is good. You want to listen to feedback from your audience, but you don't want it to become so crippling that you don't know what move to make, or where you lose sight of why you're doing what you're doing and what your message is, and where your business and elements of your life and how you show up and your style and the way that you look is affected by the expectations of your audience versus what's true and authentic for you in that particular moment, because that's equally as disgusting as sharing too much, to like move in the opposite direction of sharing what you feel like you kind of should be sharing because it's the expectation or the norm or what you've built versus what's, authentically true for you. We're all growing, we're all changing. So it's normal that what's true for you can also change over time. And it's important to realize that, and to realize that you don't have to hang on to things that don't feel true to you, because that's just icky and disgusting.
Mm. Yeah. So our truth can evolve as we evolve,
Yeah,
as does
exactly.
our story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, every day when you get up, you're writing a new page of your story. Sometimes it's going to turn out to be a new chapter without you realizing it. You can have a conversation that shifts everything for you and shifts about how you think about your life and about your business. But when you wake up in the morning, you don't necessarily know that it's going to happen.
Hmm.
So it's always being written. And sometimes it was important to you 2 years ago isn't important now. And that's normal and good. And you just need to shift your story accordingly. And lots of people have done this, really, really successfully. And then there are people who haven't done it so successfully. So it's about how you approach it ultimately makes like the biggest difference.
So what would it look like if it's done successfully?
So a successful kind of pivot in your brand involves kind of easing your audience into it. I think one of the things that can really break trust for an audience is when you just cut things off from one day to the next with no warning. And I'm all for ditching programs that don't feel aligned, like all that kind of stuff is great. But if you're going to make a complete pivot in what you're talking about, you at least want to have like a transitional period where you start to bring it in, or where you talk to your audience about the things that you've been going through recently and what that's kind of bringing up, or how you're shifting around that without giving them too many details where it does become that, vulnerability vomit. But you can give them hints that are helpful and productive.
Mm. So give them more of what they need to know and not everything. And I think that's where the fine line is. And that's where a lot of people get caught up, is like, well, I don't know what is too much. Like, how do I know if I'm treading the lines of vulnerability vomit?
Yeah, so I think too much is anything. If you would look at that on someone else's page and think like, ooh, I don't know why they're sharing that, or like that doesn't make them look great. So a good example of this is a lot of times I'll see business coaches cry about being like, I want to share my authentic truth. I didn't make any money this month. And then the next day they're trying to charge you $10,000 a month for coaching.
Right.
Something like that, the action taken the day before doesn't lead to confidence or trust with their audience for
Hmm.
the following day. Like you can be going through that for sure. And you can be going through a spell in the rut because maybe your business is no longer aligned. Like, maybe you're taking a different direction. Maybe you're pivoting and it's not going as well as you thought. But you need to figure out the problems and you need to work through the solution so that you can come at it from an empowered place. If you're just telling people your, minute to minute on the spot truths, that can actually be really damaging to your brand. And sometimes you can never get that back. You can never get back to that same level of trust, because once trust is broken, we all know it's a process and it takes a while to get that back.
That is so important. I think, especially now in the era of social media, because social media has made it really easy for us to use our devices as our Dear Diaries, right? Like a lot of people just like emotionally vomit into their phones, whether it's like Instagram or even IG stories or Facebook Lives or Facebook, whatever it is. They treat it like it's their diary, and they put shit out there. And I've read a ton of posts, and I know I'm certain I've probably written posts like this in my
Oh, for
past.
sure. Me too. I've definitely done this. We've all made this mistake. That's why we can
Yeah.
talk about it, is because we've done it in the past. So
Yeah. But I love how you're really tying this into audience loyalty and
mhm.
trust, because I think that is so important. And a lot of people look for immediate reaction, whether it's conscious or unconscious. Like they might be conscious of like, I need immediate reaction because I need validation, or it might be this unconscious thing, like I need to post this. I don't know that I really need validation, but this is actually what I need, because they want the likes, they want the engagement, they want the validation that what they're going through is real, or whatever the fuck it is. Um, but really, at the end of the day, this is the thing that could make or break the trust that you've established or are trying to establish with your audience.
yeah, absolutely. Which I think is one of the scariest things for people is I think a lot of people just act and they're very reactive in their business, which,
Mm,
that's always going to happen for everyone to an extent. But it's when they do something that they realize that their audience really hasn't responded to, they
hmm.
then don't have a way to really get that back or to crisis control and crisis manage, which can really hurt your bottom line, like people's businesses, because of something that they've said. A really great example of this is in the beauty community on YouTube right
Mm-hmm.
now, as we're filming this. Like, it's a disaster. There are people's careers have been pretty much ended by something that they've said a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that lack of responsibility, lack of awareness, lack of, appropriate plan in place of how they're going to deal with something that is ultimately, it can be career ending. So it's really important to tiptoe that line between, okay, I want to share and I want to share my truth, but do I share this now, or am I better to, cross over to the other side and come to it from an empowered place in a few months?
Yeah, that's so important. I always say, like, sometimes when we're in it, or when we haven't actually healed through the story that we want to share, we actually share from a victim mentality. We may not be aware of it, but we share from a victim mentality versus sharing from having gone through it, having healed from it. From there, you're sharing from an empowered mentality, and you have something to offer your audience because now you can teach them about the lessons that you learned, or complete the story. Versus, like, when you're in the thick of it, I mean, it's really fucking hard to control your emotions. And when you're in that victim mentality state, we do want validation. We do want someone to say, oh my God, I'm so sorry you're going through this, or oh my God, I've gone through this too, or whatever it is. And man, like, that can really fucking damage a brand, especially because I think so many influencers are solopreneurs, right? Like, influencers are usually their own brand, their own face. And so I don't know, it's kind of hard. Maybe you can explain this to me. So there's reality TV, right? And people kind of share a lot. We don't know what they're cutting out, what they're editing out, and these people gain a lot of fame, and the YouTubers and all of that. And I think so much of that mentality and culture has bled into the online entrepreneurial space, where now people feel like, I'm the star, I need to share all of this shit. Oh my God, stories, let me share everything that's going on in my life. So again, like, how do we tread that so that we are continuing to build trust with our audience whilst connecting to them with our stories?
Yeah, so I think the big thing with this is really having a content plan and sticking to your content plan. And content plans can allow for fluidity, right? So, you can always swap something out if you feel really called to do something, but at least having a set of guidelines for your content, or a set of guidelines for what your brand values are. And before you post, or if you're trying to decide if something should go on Instagram, if you should talk about something, and if you should share what's going on, are the things that you're sharing in the spirit of your brand guidelines and your brand values and your, content guidelines? Or are they out of integrity with that? If they're not in integrity with that, then it's probably not authentic for you to share in that moment. And maybe take some time, reflect, and then in 3 weeks, when you've, hopefully really gotten over it, process it, all that good stuff, you can share it. And it doesn't remove any of the power. It actually brings so much power back into it, because now you have the benefit of reflection. And that's why they say that hindsight is 2020,
Mm.
because you really see where those lessons are and where those nuggets are. And that's what your audience wants to hear anyway, is those nuggets that will help them move forward, or that will bridge the gap between you and them, or them and their problem, whatever kind of, content you're trying to put out there at that point.
Mm, that's so smart. Content planning for building trust with audiences, which is cool, because that really helps keep you in check with yourself, and then with what it is that you're saying. And what you mentioned, Erika, which I think is super important for those of you who didn't quite catch that: values. What are your company or your brand values? That is so crucial to build your brand, because it's kind of like the foundational piece of everything that you build on top of it. And it also helps you understand, what do I talk about? What products do I create? What does my business do? What am I aligned with? Who will I work with, etc. So if you don't even have your brand values, like, go back to square one and start working on that.
Exactly. You need those foundational pieces of a business so that you can actually make sure that you have a business at the end of the day. And, there's nothing that says that you can't capture really raw moments in the moment. But I think the difference is that maybe don't feel compelled to share them. Like, yeah, do whip out Instagram and whip out the hands-free option, record your thoughts, but like maybe wait 24, 48 hours even before posting them, because you'll still be able to have that little bit of hindsight on where you can realize like there's actually nothing of value for the audience here, or you can go in and edit. Same thing, you can record like a vlog, you can write a post, and there's no reason why you can't post it 2 days later. But then you have the benefit of just having that little moment of reflection. It's like Google added in the unsend or the undo for emails
Mhm.
for 5 seconds. So that if you send an email and you're like, oh my God, should not have done that, you have that little buffer of space where you can make a decision to unsend real quick. And that's what you need, is you want to give yourself that little buffer to really see if what you're doing is aligned to what you're trying to grow and what your bigger mission is and what your bigger why is, because what your audience sees in one way or another should always ultimately support that.
That's so important. I'm just thinking about how I do this and how I've been navigating through it because, I go through a lot of shit as an entrepreneur, solopreneur. There's a lot of shit we go through. And often when I'm in the middle of something, I'll take out like the notepad on my phone or on my computer and I'll write a post in there. And what I find is just by writing it in there, I'm okay. It's for me, writing is a processing thing and it helps me process. So for those of you listening, perhaps that's why you always feel like this nudge, like you really need to share this. Is it just because you need to process, or is it because you're seeking validation? So one of the questions I always tell my clients to ask is like, before you hit send, ask why. Why is this important for me to publish? And if the answer comes back to something related to you, then it's not for your audience.
I love that. I think that's a great tip. And I think it's such a great way of filtering to make sure that whatever you're doing is audience centric as opposed to ego centric.
Mm.
It's good to have a healthy amount of self-esteem, to talk about your wins, obviously, to talk about the exciting things that you're doing. But are you sharing those things in a way that ultimately benefits your audience and that moves your audience forward as well? Because you shouldn't see, I think a lot of times entrepreneurs can get really lost in that focus of seeing their audience as cash as opposed to seeing their audience as people who are also going through things and who also have their own trials and tribulations. So is the purpose of what you're sharing to help them get to where you are and to help them overcome? Or is it something that's ego based because you feel like you need that validation, but it's really at the end of the day not going to bring anything to them, or it's not going to add to their lives in any real tangible way?
You just gave two super juicy nuggets, one being audience centric versus ego centric, and the other being, see your audience as people, not cash. Which brings me to something else that I know you and I have both witnessed and you brought up just before we hit record here, are the people who are basically just diving into the idea of like, let me be polarizing for the sake of being polarizing, because I know that this is going to bring people into my orbit and have people like my posts and create a long thread. But quite often it's not the right messaging. So do you want to talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think, the kind of entrepreneurial sphere, especially in the digital space, we're going through a little bit of a transition. We're trying to figure out where this is going, what we are, what we're doing. So there's been a lot of like breakup posts lately. I call them breakup posts or breakup live streams where people are like, I'm over this bullshit. Like, I'm over this, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. This industry is broken. And it doesn't matter if it's marketing, health coaching, like fitness, whatever it is. A lot of those have been kind of making their way to the surface. And I think it's good to be really reflective of the industry that you're in and think about problems that are happening in the industry and why you find certain things problematic. Absolutely amazing. Where I think a lot of people are falling short right now is that they're pointing out problems, but they're not giving solutions. So
Mm.
you're still a part of the problem until you propose a solution. you're still stuck in that problem. You're still a part of what's going on. And if your actions don't reflect a more solutions focused outcome for your industry as a whole, then you're still contributing to the problem that you claim that you dislike.
Mm. Yeah. So I have seen so many of these posts, and I probably have done this. I
Oh
think
yeah, I've probably done this as well in
yeah.
the past.
Um,
Like we're always talking from our own mistakes, which is why
right.
we can talk about this with reflection now.
Yeah, we're in the reflection state. And it's really cool. It's really interesting because it is super easy to point out problems. Like once you see a problem, you can't unsee it. And so it's super easy to point out problems. What's hard is creating a solution for that problem. And I feel like the reason why people gravitate towards like, let me just like magnetize this problem by creating post after post after post about it and do a Facebook Live on this and what I'm sick and tired of, what I no longer stand for and all that shit is because it's attention seeking. You know, it's a way for you to get the quick attention, for you to snap like a bunch of quick likes and a bunch of engagement because everyone's ranting about the same shit. But if we talk about trust building and loyalty, those quick snippets of like getting a surge in your audience, does that actually really last?
Yeah, like it's such a cheap gimmick. It's, it's like those, buy one and get 52 free and only pay shipping. Like it's kind of the equivalent of that. It really is just like a cheap gimmick, and you can only run your business on cheap gimmicks for so long before no one cares. And I think too, as a creator, it's a lot of pressure to figure out what your next gimmick or what your next stunt is going to be. Like that's not really a sustainable way to run your business. I'm all for being disruptive and for doing things differently, but be disruptive in one way. Don't make being disruptive your, entire business model and your entire, reason for being, because that's going to be really stressful for you as well.
Because you're always going to be looking for ways to disrupt what's actually going on. And that's fucking exhausting. And
Yeah.
then you're not really providing anything of value to your followers, to your audience.
Yeah, like the thing is, we all talk about shiny object syndrome and it being a problem. Like, you do not want to be the shiny object for people. You
Mm.
don't want to be the shiny object that is, constantly causing them to go off course, or that's, shiny object syndrome is like not a good thing. So don't force it, and don't become that thing with shady content and disruptive, posts for disruption's sake. If you're going to put something out there that's disruptive, like really mean it and put it out there with a game plan, or at least open a dialogue. If you don't have all the solutions, at least open a dialogue. So a good example of this is I made a post about how I would no longer market to women about making $100,000 in their business. Because
FYI, I love this post. That was like one of
thank
my
you.
favorite posts I've ever seen. Keep going.
Thank you. Yeah, so I wrote that post because number one, I don't think that women realize once they hit that mark that not much will have changed, because your investments grow in your business over time, and you're putting more money into taxes, and it's not this like golden private members club that it's made out to be. Your life isn't significantly different after you hit six figures, and it's not like your business is suddenly all figured out. But I also think that the kind of lifestyle that most women are after, especially in the online space, doesn't actually happen at six figures. It happens beyond that. And so there's a reason why Russell Brunson doesn't have the one comma club. There's a reason why it's the two comma club. And you can love or you can hate him, but he has figured out that, seven figures is really what will move the needle for a lot of people. And my clients in particular want that seven-figure lifestyle. So why am I going to keep marketing six figures to them when that's not congruent with what they want? It's not congruent with what I want. And it also is just such a cheap way of marketing to money. There's so much more that we can do that's impact based. And when you focus on how to help more people, how to, start actually solving problems in the world beyond how do I make more money comes in as a result of that, because the more problems that you're able to effectively solve and the more transformations that you're able to make, the more that your ripple effect starts to grow and the more that the people that you transform start to transform others. So for me, marketing to six figures was no longer productive, but I edited that post thoroughly to make sure that what I said was what I meant to say. And people still said, like, girl, your math is off. Like, your math is really off. You didn't account for student loans. You didn't account for health insurance in the US. I was like, privileged checked. I'm a Canadian. I don't have to think about those kinds of things. So in the end, like, people went from having $300 left over to being in the hole still at six figures with the most basic math. I also accounted for only being a single woman. If you have kids, the situation changes even more. So I wrote about something that I believed in, but I made sure that it was tasteful and that I did it in a way that was productive and reflected and that invited comments. It was shared dozens of times, and hundreds of women at every level of income commented on that post because there was something in it for them, and people who had never interacted started interacting with each other, and it just became its own like beautiful ecosystem.
Do you think we could provide our listeners with a link to that post?
Yeah, I'll dig it up and I'll find it.
Okay, cool. Because I would love for them to be able to see this in action. I think it's easier to talk about this piece of like authenticity versus vulnerability vomit. But it's so much, it makes more impact when you can actually see it in action. And yeah, that was a beautiful post, and it was educational. It was informing. It was insightful. It got you to think versus like, here's my rant. Everything sucks. This is what I'm feeling. And that's it. Like, there's nothing productive about that. And then the kind of comments that type of vomit welcomes isn't really the kind of attention that you want on your brand long term.
Yeah, well, this post too, what I loved about it in particular was I had women who were 7 and 8 figure earners come in and say, well, the reason why I do this is because we all have to start, somewhere. So I help them get to there. Like, there was lots of different opinions, but it was always so respectful and so productive in the best way possible that it became like this living archive, not just of opinions, but of people sharing their stories, of talking about how, it gets more complicated with this and with that. And it became this beautiful archive for women to be able to talk about the fact that, yes, in a way they had been sold a lie, and it was a safe space for them to now talk about it and help not just warn other women, but also provide solutions of what they did in order to move forward and get out of that stuckness that they were in once they did hit six figures.
Yeah. And it was also because, you set the tone for that, right? So people tend to respond energetically at a similar place as the person who wrote the post. Like, if a person's writing a post from this inspirational place or an insightful educational place, a lot of people will respond from that same vibration, versus when someone writes from this ranty place, you're going to get ranty comments.
Yeah. And I think too, like, one of the big things for me was, we were talking about this earlier, of like, are you scared or are you emotionally connected to it? I wasn't emotionally connected to my wound of hitting six figures and being like, wait, what the fuck? Nothing is different. I thought this was supposed to be a magical fix, but I was like long past that, had figured out, had troubleshooted, all the problems that were in my business and moved forward. So I was able to post it from a place where, I was scared because I was afraid of backlash, but I knew it was more important for my audience to read that than it was for me to like get caught in my own bullshit and not post it. So that's a perfect example of seeing the fear and doing it anyways, versus I'm in the middle of a crisis, let me turn the camera on, or let me write out, a long post. If readers are trying to figure, or if listeners are trying to figure out the difference, like, that's a great example for me of where I've done that from a really graceful space. But if I had done it as soon as I crossed six figures, I would have been a lot more like, what the fuck? I can't believe that people still made this lie. Like, where's my Facebook group with all the other 6-figure earners? Like, blah, 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 blah. Would it come out really like whiny because I was a 6-figure victim. I wasn't an empowered business owner figuring out how to move forward from a problem that she had encountered.
Yeah, totally. 6-figure victim.
It's like the champagne problem of victimhood.
Right. So let's wrap this up. I would love for you to provide just sort of like some good takeaway tips for our listeners, because really what this boils down to is creating that trust with your audience. So what are some nuggets of wisdom that you can leave them with in terms of that?
Go into your business with core values set. When you know what your values are and you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, you will make much more informed and conscious decisions about everything that you're doing in your business. Number 2, don't be afraid to hit pause for a second on posting something or putting something out there. See if there's another way for you to either record your feelings or put your feelings down and come back to it 48 hours later and see how you feel about it. Is that need still there and is there value there? And create things that are audience driven, not ego driven, and have that be, your barometer for how audience centric am I being. If you're being really audience centric, you're probably in a good place. If you're being really ego centric, you probably have things that you need to work through, and welcome to being a human, but maybe you shouldn't put those out in your business.
Awesome. Those are some powerful nuggets. 3 nuggets, audience, love punchers. Make sure that you listen to that again, write that shit down. Erika, thank you so much for being here on Love Punch. You have provided a ton of value in terms of like how to build trust with your audience from a place of like authenticity and not like vulnerability vomit. So I know that our listeners are going to gain a lot from this episode. Why don't you tell our listeners where they can stalk you online?
So it's consistent all across social media it's Erika Ashley. So feel free to stalk me there. My website is itserikaashley.com. So feel free to, send me anything. I love getting DMs from people. If you found value or if you're trying to work something out, just send me a DM on Instagram. I'm always open and available to provide you with some feedback.
I love that. Thank you so much. To our listeners, thanks for joining us on today's episode of Love Punch, where I'm challenging thought leaders, influencers, and entrepreneurs like you to make a lasting impact. Don't forget to download my free online training at rubyfremont.com/CPR. While you're there, check out my upcoming 3-day event in Los Angeles, Amplified Soul Live. The link for that is rubyfremont.com/ASL. Erika, I really hope that we can just continue deepening this friendship because I fucking love what you stand for and the way in which you promote your business and what you do, because you do so from such an authentic, real way that again, like draws people into your orbit. So thanks again for all the nuggets of wisdom. I hope you had fun today.
I did. Thank you so much. I look forward to connecting more with your audience and with all the love punchers out there.
Cool. So love punchers, if you dig this episode, drop a rating and a review on iTunes and reach out to us on the social webs if you want to connect. This episode was sponsored by the Mayfair Hotel and Eve American Bistro. I will see you here next week for a brand new episode of Love Punch.